guys, so I wanted to talk about how I practice today. I get a lot of people asking how I learn the pieces so quickly for 52 weeks and for the 365, especially when I'm working on very, very complicated contemporary repertoire. And honestly, I use the same method for any piece, but I wanted to kind of break down my process so that you guys can learn things quicker and maybe practice more efficiently. So the first thing I always do is read through the piece. And when I'm reading through the piece, I'm not just trying to figure out what it sounds like, though I am. I'm also looking and listening for things that aren't working. So if there's a multiphonic that doesn't speak immediately, I'm always marking it. If there's a technique that I just can't do in the first run, marking it. If there's anything that I think is going to be difficult, marking it. But basically, I'm going through and finding all of the big problems that I'm going to encounter while working on the piece so that I go into my next practice session prepared. I know a lot of you guys learn pieces in sections as you're working through it in school, but honestly, I really don't think that works very well if you haven't already looked at the full piece. I do work in sections. I usually break the pieces into two halves or maybe even thirds depending on how difficult or how long the piece is. But if you don't know what's coming, then you don't know what to work on. And you don't know how much time you're going to need to spend on things. So really getting a good idea of what is difficult in the piece and what you're going to need to work on before you start the major work is important. As I said, I do break down the pieces into halves generally. And within each half, I go straight for the things that I marked the day before. The things that I think are going to take the most time. And they're going to require the most work. And if I start them on Monday and Tuesday, that means by Friday they're not going to be a problem. If I were to start some of these problems on Thursday, I would never have enough time to learn them. So starting with those, focusing on those. The piece I'm currently looking at was Reflections by Maggie Payne. It was a very extended piece and required a lot more focused practice on very specific sections because of its difficulty. So I really just focused on like 2 lines for the first day. They had multiphonics, they had slap tongue, they had key clicks, and some difficult flute movement that I couldn't do immediately. So working on what's equivalent of like 10 seconds of music for a couple hours. That meant that I could then play that section. Usually my goal when I'm working on the big problems is to get them about 75% of the way there. I have time in the coming week to be able to work on them a little bit more, but if I do the bulk of the work on Monday and Tuesday, that means that those problems are way smaller moving forward. In 52 weeks, I do run each section every day, and that's so I can give recordings to the composer. But if I didn't have to do that, I honestly probably wouldn't, just because it's not the best use of my time. I would prefer to spend more time linking those hard sections into the rest of the piece. Sometimes I don't have that kind of time and I just have to go with what I have. On Wednesdays, I usually start trying to link things together. I'm not going to run the full piece and I'm not going to work on just the sections that I had been the previous 2 days, but I'm also still chipping away at the big problems and adding in some of the medium problems. If something's coming together really well on Monday and Tuesday, then I'll speed up the process, but sometimes they don't. And sometimes it's still intimidating looking at the score and I feel like I'm not going to be able to learn it. And those are the days where I really have to focus and address my issues. And the biggest thing with this process is being able to be self-aware. I have to be able to acknowledge my deficiencies so I can address them. I have deficiencies. Everyone does, and there's nothing wrong with that, but being aware of them, acknowledging them, and being able to address them in the music is something that's really, really vital, or else you're just going to be skimming over things that you can't do because you don't want to say out loud that you can't play them. There's no shame in not being able to play something, but there is in denying it to yourself. The only way you can get better is to work on it. You have to really think critically about your own playing and what you need to work on. Personally, articulation is always a problem for me. And so that's something that I always have to be conscious of. So on Wednesday, I'm going to start really thinking about the bigger picture and the musical quality as well. Because while yes, I'm kind of jamming away at the technical stuff, I do also have to be a musician. I can't just be a robot. So that's the practice day where I start trying to like round out the sharp corners and really try to make things fluid and musical. And that flows into Thursday, where I'm, again, still fine-tuning stuff. If the really, really difficult stuff is still a problem, I'm focusing on that again. Usually by Thursday, I have everything kind of in my fingers. So everything's at about 75%, and then the focus is to get everything to 95%. So Friday and Saturday, I can get them to 100%. But basically, the whole process is start with the big stuff and end with the small stuff. And that makes sense. What I also want to talk about, specifically with contemporary music, is isolating techniques. There are some things that are very difficult to do in context of something else, and that's the kind of thing that you really do have to pull out and work on separately. I talk a lot in the Contemporary 101 series about practicing things away from the flute or practicing things away from your repertoire, and that will help you a lot when you're learning contemporary music. It means that your building blocks just get pieced into the piece rather than having to learn things on top of that. But if you do see a technique that you don't know how to do in a piece, that's something to address immediately. It's one of the big problems that you have to address at the beginning of the process. So if, say, you don't know how to do a slap tongue, and there's slap tongue in the piece, that's something that the first day you start working on the piece, you start learning. You start working on it away from the instrument and doing whatever you need to do. So by the end of the practicing process, you can not only do it away from the piece, but also in the piece. And it's gonna happen that there are techniques that you don't know how to do. It happens to me all the time because flute is changing and they're creating new sounds, and sometimes I encounter something that I've never seen. Knowing that I have to work on that an extra amount to be able to make up for the fact that I didn't know it from the beginning, and so it's going to be a little bit more uncomfortable, is something that is very, very important. That's a very specific thing to contemporary music because you have the contemporary sounds, and there will always be things that you have to learn how to do. Another note is when you have to sing and play, there is a bit of a process of being able to find the pitches that you have to sing and stabilize them. So that's always going to take a little bit more time than if you didn't have to sing, obviously. I usually start with those sections and sing them without the flute notes and really work on those directly. I have the pitches in my brain, and I have a better chance of being able to pick them out when I have to do it in the context of the piece. So building the groundwork before you really start piecing things together is important. I've said the same thing about 100 times. Basically, you start with the hard stuff, you focus on the hard stuff, and then you move on. Do not work on things you know you can play. I know it's frustrating, and I know it can seem incredibly discouraging when you're constantly working on things that are hard, and you want to play things that are fun, but you have to put in the work early on, or else the things that are fun aren't going to be fun anymore because you're going to be afraid of other sections. So, I hope this was helpful. I know I repeat myself a lot, but really there's only one thing that I've changed in my practice, and that's just starting from hard to easy. Whereas I used to kind of just run sections and hope that they got better. If you guys have any questions about the process or want me to go more in depth about anything, please let me know. If you like this video, give it a like. If you're new here, subscribe. If you want to support me more, check out my Patreon, and I'll see you guys on Thursday.